Big news coming out of Denver, not about free agency, but about the team itself. The Broncos just made not one, but two big coaching moves, one firing and one hiring. And trust me, the firing, it's a wild story. Welcome to the Broncos Breakdown. Let's get straight into it. First, let's talk about the firing. It was linebackers coach Michael Wilhoite, and honestly, this one didn't come as a shock. Why? Well, right before the NFL Combine, a crazy report surfaced. Wilhoite was arrested for allegedly punching a police officer. Here's what went down. It all happened at Denver Airport. Reports say Wilhoite left his car unattended in a restricted area. A police officer approached him, probably telling him to move it. But instead of handling it calmly, Wilhoite started yelling. Things escalated, and suddenly, boom, he allegedly punched the cop. At that point, the officer tasered him, he got arrested, posted bail, and that was that. With all this drama, head coach Sean Payton and the Broncos decided it was time to part ways. Wilhoite had been with Denver for 2 seasons, but after this incident, it's no surprise they decided to move on. And just like that, he becomes the 9th coach or front office member to leave the Broncos since the end of the 2024 season. The team is in the middle of a big shakeup, and they're working fast to fill these roles. One of those spots has already been taken. We'll talk about the Broncos' newest hire next. Stay tuned. All right, let's be real. There's no deep question to ask when a coach punches a cop at an airport. But it does make me wonder, how early do you get to the airport for a flight? Some people rush in 20 minutes before takeoff, living on the edge. Others, like me, prefer to show up an hour early, grab a bite, maybe even an airport beer if it's a fun trip. But Michael Wilhoite? Looks like he might have gotten there too early, left his car unattended, and, well, that decision cost him his job. Now, let's move on to the Broncos' other coaching move. This one's a hiring. The team just brought in Brian Niedermeyer as a defensive consultant. Not a huge title, but an interesting pick. For those who don't know, Niedermeyer was a coach at Tennessee, handling tight ends and linebackers. Back in college football, he worked under Jeremy Pruitt, but that coaching staff didn't last long. Why? Well, they were accused of paying players before it was legal, and the whole crew got wiped out. So now, Niedermeyer gets a fresh start in Denver. Will he make an impact? We'll see. But one thing's for sure, the Broncos' coaching staff is looking very different this season. So, here's an interesting career move. Brian Niedermeyer was just hired by the Broncos, but his coaching journey took a wild turn to get here. Just a few months ago, he was named head coach at Tuscaloosa County High School. But before he could even settle in, he left. Because, let's be honest, when the NFL calls, you answer. Now, after years of coaching in college and high school, he's finally stepping onto the biggest stage in football. Now, I trust Sean Payton's choices. 2 of his assistant coaches were just hired as offensive coordinators elsewhere. That tells you teams respect his staff. And while Niedermeyer isn't a household name, I remember him from his days at Tennessee, where he built a reputation as a top-tier recruiter. In fact, here's a story that proves it. Niedermeyer once pulled off an insane recruiting win by landing Henry To'oTo'o, a 4-star linebacker who had to choose between Tennessee and Alabama. And let's be real, Nick Saban almost never loses these battles. But this time, Niedermeyer found a way. To'oTo'o is a member of the LDS Church, so Niedermeyer decided to visit his local church service. But there was one problem. The entire sermon was in Tongan, a language he didn't understand. They handed him a headset for translation, and he sat through it, trying to keep up. Then, halfway through, it hit him. The sermon was about him. The message: don't let someone lead you down the wrong path. And there he was, sitting front and center, wearing bright orange, trying to recruit a player away from the church's traditions. Now that's commitment to recruiting. So, Niedermeyer's bringing that same drive and determination to the Broncos. Will it pay off? We'll find out soon. Now, imagine this. You're a college football coach on a mission. Your goal? Convince a talented young athlete to leave behind everything he knows, his community, traditions, and even his faith-based plans, to come play football in Knoxville, Tennessee. That was exactly the situation Brian Niedermeyer found himself in when recruiting Henry To'oTo'o, a star linebacker who was being heavily pursued by Alabama and Tennessee. And, let's be real, Nick Saban doesn't lose these battles. But somehow, Niedermeyer pulled off the impossible. He showed up at an LDS church service in an attempt to connect with To'oTo'o and his family. The only problem? The entire service was in Tongan. Now, imagine sitting in a room where everyone is speaking a language you don't understand, and the only thing keeping you in the loop is a translation headset. Niedermeyer thought he was just there as an observer, until he started listening to the sermon. At first, it seemed like any other religious service. But then, as the translation kicked in, he realized the message was all about him. The topic: beware of outsiders who try to lead you astray. And there he was, the only guy in bright Tennessee orange, sitting awkwardly in the middle of the congregation, knowing full well that he was the outsider they were talking about. Now, I don't know what was going through Niedermeyer's head at that moment, but I'd imagine it was something like, "Welp, this is not going well." Despite the awkwardness, Niedermeyer got the job done. To'oTo'o committed to Tennessee, giving the Vols a rare victory over Alabama in the recruiting game. But of course, this story doesn't end there. Fast forward 2 years, and To'oTo'o did what everyone expected. He transferred to Alabama. So, in the end, Nick Saban still won. Now, I've actually got a personal story about Henry To'oTo'o from my college days. It's nothing groundbreaking, but it's funny enough to share. Back in my senior year, I was taking a geography class, and To'oTo'o sat right behind me. He was one of the biggest stars on campus, and one day he tapped me on the shoulder. Now, when a star linebacker taps you on the shoulder, you get a little excited. Maybe he needs a pen. Maybe he wants to borrow my notes. Maybe I was about to have my first ever conversation with an SEC football star. But nope. He just looked at me and said, "Hey dude, your shirt is inside out." Yep, that was it. My one and only interaction with a future Houston Texans linebacker was him pointing out my embarrassing wardrobe mistake. And you know what? I still think about that moment to this day. But back to the Broncos. This week, they made 2 big coaching moves, one firing that we all saw coming, and one hiring that no one expected. Brian Niedermeyer just went from coaching high school football to working with the Denver Broncos. That's a massive leap, from Tuscaloosa County High School all the way to the NFL. Now, will this hire make a big difference for the Broncos? Only time will tell, but one thing's for sure: Niedermeyer is used to pulling off surprises.